This show is listener supported. You can join us and help our show grow to support more adoptees by going to adopteeson.com/partner. You're listening to Adoptees On, the podcast where adoptees discuss the adoption experience. This is episode 168, Kirsten. I'm your host, Haley Radke. We are starting a short series on the topic of estrangement. I think some of you know that I'm experiencing this myself, and it's something I've wanted to talk about and learn about, but it's just been too close to home. So I want to acknowledge that just as many of our conversations here on the podcast are deeply personal, emotion-filled, could be activating or challenging for both you and I to hear, this again will be hard. It's really interesting to me that even after this conversation with Kirsten, I felt heavy and sad with my own grief, and also the knowledge that there are so many of us who have dealt with the same and way worse, way worse. This series isn't meant to be a how to undo estrangement or how to break up with your family. It's once again in the space of hoping to let you know you aren't alone. I see you. I acknowledge how hard and lonely this can be. With that, let me share what you're going to hear from our guest, Kirsten Weatherford. We talk about how a memorable trip, a pilgrimage, helped Kirsten come out of the fog, how reunion with her first mother likely accelerated her estrangement from her adoptive parents, and we also wrestle with what it would take to even broach the subject of reunification if that was ever on the table. We wrap up with some recommended resources, and as always, links to everything we'll be talking about today are on the website, adopteeson.com. Let's listen in. I'm so pleased to welcome to Adoptees On, Kirsten Weatherford. Welcome, Kirsten.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
I would love it if you would start and share your story with us.
All right. I was born in Pennsylvania to a single mother and immediately relinquished in January of 1971. I spent 3 months in a private foster home before being placed with my adoptive parents. I was raised an only child, center of the world at all times.
Me too.
We moved. Yeah, it's a thing, isn't it?
Well, you said center of the world, and already I was like, oh my goodness, I hear you.
Mm-hmm. It's a big deal. We moved across the country from Pennsylvania to Oregon when I was 4. We moved again from Oregon to Colorado when I was 5. I spent most of my childhood in Colorado and say I kind of grew up there. We moved to Montana when I was a freshman in high school. And other than 1 year of college back in Colorado, I have been here ever since then. I have been married for 30 years. My husband and I have 5 children together, ranging in age from 10 to nearly 30. As far as my adoption journey, I started coming out of the fog in January of 2010. I took a pilgrimage trip with my husband and some other folks from our church in April of 2013. That was a big deal. That's kind of where I found the pit of my soul, and my journey really took off from there. I came home from Scotland knowing I had to search and try and find my birth mom. We found each other. I found her. It took until February of 2017, and we started communicating. She was actually located about 6 months prior to that, but it took us until February of 2017 to start communicating. I traveled to Pennsylvania that summer, July of 2017. We met for the first time in person. 6 weeks later, they came to Montana to visit my family on our turf. And we have been in reunion, continued to be ever since then. My last exchange with my adoptive parents was about a year after the reunion with my first mom. In June of 2018, there were some letters exchanged between us. And the last face-to-face conversation was in August of 2018 when I walked out of their home for the last time.
Well, thank you for sharing that. There's a lot of different ways we could go. So you've been in reunion with your first mother for a few years, and you kind of lit up when you were talking about her, and so I get the sense that is going well. I'll let you say.
It is more than I ever expected. I have a very large first family on my maternal side, and I was welcomed home by all of them with open arms, and they are amazing and incredible and gracious, wonderful people that helped me find my way back home to myself, not just to them, but to the center of myself as well.
That's profound. Oh my goodness. I got goosebumps. Okay, so I asked you to come on because we're going to have this really hard conversation talking about estrangement. And so, I'm sad that we're not going to dive into your beautiful reunion and how did you do it and all those things. But I think, you mentioned this before we got on, and I've experienced the same. I've heard from so many people, so many adoptees who are estranged from their adoptive families. And, it's wild. It's wild. It's something I never thought was going to happen to me either. And I'm experiencing that with you as well. So I'm curious, as you've talked to other adoptees and as you look at your own situation, yours kind of happened during just the beginning of your reunion. And do you think that had an impact, or what have you unpacked there?
I think if you asked my adoptive parents, they would lay blame on the reunion as a defining event that broke our relationship. In all honesty, it had been probably 30 years in the making. We really struggled as I became an adult and tried to establish some independence as my own person with my own family. Those boundaries were not honored. It took me a long time to even place any boundaries with them. I received unsolicited advice, not really advice, meddling and directives as to how we were raising our family, choices we were making. There was little to no autonomy in our relationship. But as I mentioned, I think they would blame the reunion. I would credit the reunion with giving me enough strength in myself to place those boundaries I had spoken to you about that allowed me to say no. This space. I even placed some boundaries as I was in reunion. I didn't even tell them that I was searching when I was actively searching for my first mom. I didn't even tell them because for me, it felt like it was my story and my journey. And I didn't want them to invade that. That was mine. It was something I had ownership over. And I suspected they would twist things to make it about them and how violated and hurt they were, which eventually is what it came around to, was that I had hurt them and I was no longer grateful for all they had done for me.
Oh, dear. Oh, dear. Okay, so I want to frame these questions and just say we are not just going to bash our parents the whole time. That's not what this conversation is about. And so sure. It's just to talk about, and I'm not saying that to you, I'm talking to our listeners. So you guys know, we're not just okay, we're going to complain about all the things our parents did wrong. But I'm curious for you, when you talk about this was 30 years in the making and you had tried to, become your own autonomous person as an adult and build your own family and make your own decisions. Do you remember some things along the way, things that they did or a certain event or anything like that, that you were like, whoa, like you're really stepping over the line? Or is it more like you're looking back on it now and seeing that, oh, that was really over the line?
I think that there was some ability at the time to recognize it. Certainly now, in a more reflective state, I see it much more clearly. Even in reading, I went back in preparation for recording this. I went back and read those last letters that were exchanged between us, and I'm seeing them even differently now than at the time I received them. So yeah, there were definitely moments where specifically, and this doesn't necessarily speak to a gun, non-gun issue. I'm in Montana. We hunt here. We're outdoors people. My husband grew up hunting. I was raised around guns just as target practice, those type of things, but I did know how to use firearms. I'm not an anti-gun person by any means, but I'm also not a gun-toting, I kind of try and walk in the middle, I guess, is where I'm at. But my parents had asked if they could give our oldest son, who was 6 at the time, a .22. And we said, no, we don't feel he's...
For those people that don't know what a .22 is, can you just explain it to us like we're 6?
It's like a kind of the initiation into a small rifle. Okay, it's easy to handle, kind of a first gun for a kid, so to speak. Beyond a BB gun, but, kind of a step into a first actual firearm. They asked if they could get him one. We said no and assumed that would be honored. It was not. Our son received a .22 from my parents with a gleam in their eyes and almost a ha-ha, now what are you going to do kind of attitude, which left especially my husband in a position to take away something that had been gifted by grandparents. It left us to be the bad guys, which is often how it felt like we were painted, as the us versus them. What are you going to do about it now kind of situation.
Oh boy, you don't want to be the bad guy, but yikes, that's total overstepping to ask ahead of time and then completely not respect that. That's kind of shocking to me.
It happened a lot.
So when those things happened, did you have conversations with them about it after? Like, were there fights?
No.
No? Okay.
I wasn't in a place to have those conversations at the time. Again, a lot of what I can talk about now was not what I could talk about in that time and in that space. I was not comfortable enough in myself that I could say, absolutely not, especially in the moment. I couldn't stand up and say, no, we said no, you can take this back. It just wasn't possible.
I'm asking that, and I understand so much because I'm like, oh, just having the conflict and having to try and stand up for yourself, and it's like, especially in the moment, goodness, like, yikes. I don't think I would be able to do that.
Especially when it involves your kids,
Yeah.
That just made it feel exceptionally violating.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So did there come a time prior to the reunion and sort of just the last few years where this kind of came to a head? Did there come a time, earlier than that where you were like, okay, I'm seeing some bad patterns of me not being listened to. I really have to start doing XYZ with them to kind of make sure my family and my feelings are respected, like where you set out some boundaries, whether or not you told them, but just had them in your mind. Did there come a time like that?
Oh, absolutely. It was probably mid 2013-ish. So I was back from our trip to Scotland.
And you would call that a pilgrimage.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. The island of Iona, Scotland is often regarded as a holy place. It's a very, very small island in the Outer Hebrides. It's credited with being the birthplace of Christianity for Scotland. It's this incredible, quiet, small place that really gives you the opportunity to do some reflection. And yeah, it was honestly an experience I still, this many years later, can't appropriately give words to. It's where I found the pit of my soul. It's where I really began to understand what being a child of adoption meant for me. I broke down. I just recently was able to put some phrasing to it and say that I tried to crawl into the loneliest part of myself while I was there. And like I said, came home. So we had been home from Scotland, not even actively searching really yet. 2013, we would have still had 4 kids at home. We had gone out to dinner with my parents, and as had often taken place when we would go out to dinner, something would go wrong. Somebody's food wouldn't be right, or the service wasn't appropriate, or something of that nature. And that night in particular, my dad unleashed a personal assault on the server, who really had no control over the situation. And he was doing the best he could. They were quite busy. He was the only guy on that side that was working. Things were taking a while, but we try and be understanding people. However, my father was not understanding and just verbally assaulted this poor waiter. And I was seated there. It was a large table because it was my husband, myself, our 4 kids, at least 1 plus 1, and my parents. So it was a pretty big table, and my husband and I were at opposite ends of the table. And I know I physically slumped over, and I just had this sickening feeling in my gut. My husband at the other end, I think we were telepathically maybe communicating with each other. Had we been able to make eye contact, or had I chosen to do that, I believe in that moment we would have gotten up and left. It was embarrassing. I did not want to ever. I never did. That was a defining moment. I never subjected my kids to going out to dinner with them again. I don't believe that service workers are at all deserving of the treatment they often get. And that was such a personal attack on a stranger who was just trying to do his job, that was a pretty defining moment, though. So that was kind of a big boundary. We decided then and there that we would never go out to dinner again with them.
So what happened the next time they asked you? Did you just say, oh, no? Like, did you always just put it off and say no? Or did you tell them?
I think they knew. That was so bad. There was very little conversation the rest of that meal. And as was the typical pattern, after my dad would blow up and make a scene, the following day, my mother called and wanted to apologize and gloss things over and kind of smooth the waters in the hopes that we would forgive and forget. And there just was not any going back from it that time. We were done.
Oh, my goodness. So going back to this experience you had in Scotland, which sounds like incredibly profound, to, repeat the word I said before, but then you decide to search and things, but you said you were keeping that to yourself because it wasn't maybe safe to share with them. Probably wasn't safe to share with them.
No, it was not something I even considered mentioning to them. I had no hope that they would understand that it was something that I needed. It was no reflection on the difficulties of my relationship with them. It was very much about me and what I needed and what I felt very deeply as something I needed to try and solve maybe not solve, but find peace with and find answers to. It was just this deep longing for the unknown. And I also came to a place where I really wanted to know and have a different story that maybe I could tell myself versus what I had believed to be true fundamentally about myself. I wanted to be able to get to a place where I could understand myself and accept myself as a more positive entity in the world versus something somebody had discarded.
Oh, I feel that too. Okay, so I don't know. Are you okay with this? Do you want to kind of walk us through sort of what happened did you try and set up some boundaries and they weren't respected? Like, what were the last kind of things that sort of happened before it was like, okay, the letters and we're done?
Yeah. One of the last defining moments, my husband and oldest son and son-in-law were coaching the youngest son's baseball team. So, these are little kids. They're like, I don't know, 6, 7 years old at the time. So it's kind of a entertaining free-for-all as the spectators to be watching these kids. It's kind of a happy environment. My oldest son had brought his dog with him, as he often did. And the dog was sitting near my father-in-law and was perfectly content. She was a real sweet, gentle dog. And my mother came up and made a comment and coddled over the dog about how she couldn't get anywhere and everybody was being mean. And she very much believes that she's the only one that treats animals well enough. Nobody else does it well enough. She's the only one that cares for them enough. And so the comment of, oh, poor Jazz, you just aren't being taken care of. My oldest son was there, and he said, why don't you just take care of it? Nobody else ever does it right. And that made her angry. That made my father angry. My father-in-law, the poor guy, just sat there kind of dumbfounded, didn't say anything. I also didn't say anything. I let it happen. It was kind of a boundary that was put up via my oldest son, who at that point is an independent adult himself as well. So I let it happen. And they went and watched the rest of the youngest son's baseball game from their car. And kind of didn't talk to anybody else after that. They stopped coming to the games. They didn't interact with us near as much after that. There was one phone call about what had taken place. I was put in a position to maybe defend myself and my lack of reaction. And I wasn't willing to give in. I wasn't willing to back down into the sheepish role of still being their small child. And that was kind of the last defining thing that then led to the letters were exchanged after the baseball thing probably took place in like April. In May, I had placed a phone call to them to invite them to the Mother's Day brunch that we were going to be going to with husband and I and our 5 kids and my in-laws. We all live in the same town. We're all here. It's all very local. And I called to invite them to that as well. And I received, I think, what I've called a verbal assault and a go to hell message from my dad on that phone call. And it's really the last time I've kind of spoken to him directly. There was never any other conversation between the two of us after that.
First of all, I'm sorry that happened. That sounds really painful. And just when you're describing it, just the event, at the baseball field or whatever, it doesn't feel like that kind of big of a deal. And if, and yet from the stories I've heard from other people and something from me too, it's kind of like, that's the last straw,
Oh, for sure. Sure.
Right?
Yeah. The event with the dog was, in the grand scheme of things, it was minor, but it was like the last time we wanted to be diminished.
Well, can you talk about this? Having your son be the one to be like, giving his grandma a little sass, like, hello. What did that feel like for you as a parent? Because he's grown up with her.
Yeah. And I was actually kind of proud of him. Honestly, he grew up with the most influence from them for the longest period of time of all of our children. He has spent time in therapy as well. And he created those hard boundaries before I could. And so I really have to say that I was proud, and I kind of learned a lesson from him in that healthy boundaries are necessary and need to be respected. And when they're not, when those boundaries are violated, that's a clear message.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it definitely sounded like, especially just his words, was just like really calling her out on something.
I cleaned it up
okay.
For broadcast here. There were some choice.
Oh, that's too bad. My editor loves beeping things.
There were some colorful words that were exchanged.
Okay.
It was pretty clear.
Okay. I wonder how you're feeling now. You just said you reread the letters that you exchanged, and you even have a different perspective on it now. And you're a few years out from kind of these events and having contact with them. What does it feel like for you?
I don't miss them. I don't miss them. I don't miss the constant turmoil that it caused in my own household. I miss the idea of them, but them specifically, I don't miss. I'm saddened by the fact that for them, it became an either or. They couldn't do both and. They met my first mom the first time she came here, and it was cordial. My dad was able to have some conversation with my stepdad. Everybody's from this small little community back in Pennsylvania, and so there are common people. They know some of the same people, and those conversations were good. And what could have bonded my adoptive dad and I in kind of a deeper way, because once I had visited, we could have conversation about these locations, and it's where he had grown up as well. And so we could have had this deeper connection over place that we were both from. And instead of that, we now have basically no connection. It didn't have to be an either or. That was their choice. And I think it was their inability to see it from my perspective and see it as what I needed that had little to no reflection on them at the time.
As an adopted person, how hard has it been to even know what you needed?
Well, let's see. I started coming out of the fog in 2010, and I have much clearer vision now, but at the same time, things will catch me off guard in a moment. it's right below the surface. It's always being an adopted person is always brewing right below the surface. And sometimes it catches me off guard. And so, yeah, to know what I needed or what I wanted, or even being able to communicate maybe what that was for me, was something I struggled for a long time. And I'm still a work in progress. I think I always will be.
Well, you said, I don't miss them.
Mm-mm.
And I like, when you hear me say that back to you, what is that? Do you feel anything inside? Like, are you like, oh boy, should I like, what if they hear that? What, like, do you have any of that stuff? Or can you confidently say, no, you know what? I know what I feel now, and I don't miss them, and I've reflected on this, and
I can confidently say that I don't miss them. I don't miss the constant, and it's a repeat of what I said earlier. It was just such a constant state of turmoil for my own household that it's much more peaceful without them in our lives. And as I said, they live less than 2 miles away from me. I had somebody ask me the other day, like, aren't you worried you're going to see them at the store? And I used to be. I haven't seen them out and about, which is okay. I did probably 2 weeks ago. I'm pretty sure I saw my dad in Walmart, but he didn't see me. I kept on a walking. He was in line checking out, and I just kept on a walking because I'm not willing to go there.
So, correct me if I'm wrong. It kind of seems like you both are just like, yeah, I'm not going to reach out. Seems like they're very angry too. It kind of was like a big blow up. You're nodding your head. Okay. So, where I'm going with this, and as I said, this is kind of my first conversation about estrangement, and we're going to do a little series on it. But what are your thoughts on reconnection and reconciliation? And if that's even something you would want, what would need to happen for you to even consider that? Or is that something that you're like, no, I'm not even going to go down that road. I don't even want to talk about it. And even just asking the question, I kind of feel a little bit like, well, I don't want to just like bring it up like that. We're having this conversation, and the point of which is at some point we all just want to be reconnected and like fix the relationship, and like that's the goal. I'm not saying that. I'm curious on your thoughts.
I am not willing to re-engage with them unless and until they're willing to do some work on their part I would like them to have some ownership of how we got to where we are today, instead of it being a bunch of finger pointing. I would love to see them have some openness and ability to see their part in how things ended up. Realistically, we're talking about people who are in their late 70s, early 80s. And my 50 years of experience tell me that they're not going to do anything differently. They're just, it's not in their makeup of who they are. So I think I've gotten to a place for me that I can say, it wasn't about me personally. Whoever landed in their home as the kid who won the lottery and ended up placed with them, it would have been the same. It was about who they were. It wasn't about who I was. It was who they wanted or needed or expected me to be. And when I tried to live out my own person as my own person, instead of the reflection of who they hoped I could be for their sake, that's kind of when things fell apart. And so I don't know that I just don't know that they have it in them to see it any other way. They have no other lens other than their own.
think, I don't know, here's my 2 cents, and it's just the same as what this podcast cost you to listen to. It's free. I just see so many of us. I love how you express that so beautifully. So many of us work to discover who we are. A lot of you that are listening, especially, we have been going through therapy and finding our identity and just becoming, a lot of the times that includes just becoming a better human. And yes. What I see just in the grand scheme of things in the world, when you have a human who's going through therapy and improving themselves, and you're moving further and further away from the people that are just staying stagnant and aren't willing to change and improve. And the tension just keeps building as you find more of yourself. So I'm really happy for you, Kirsten, that you are able to see things that way. I feel like it sounds like you're coming from such an empowered place in that decision, and that you don't have to feel like, oh shoot, what if I would have said this, but this would have held us on a little longer, or, those kind of little regrets that some of us.
Sure. Yeah. My husband, of course, leading up to this, we've been talking about defining events in that relationship. And he reminded me of kind of the first and last time he saw me really stand up and defend my position as a mother and our position as parents in relation to our middle daughter, who we struggled with tremendously. But we worked through a really difficult situation, not just in our relationship with her. We were trying to help our own kids navigate their relationships with each other. But we tried to do it in a respectful way and allow them to navigate that space. And we wanted to have our ability to navigate that space. And everything's good now. At the time that I stood up, my mother was insistent that I should do this and I should do that. And well, you should make him talk to her. And here's what you need to do. And I just said, no, let us do this. Let us figure this out. If we're not doing it the same way you are, that doesn't mean it's wrong. Respect us enough. And maybe I don't know, I'd like to say at this point that we weren't navigating things wrong, because it's all come back together and we're all in good space with each other. But her interference was unwelcomed, unnecessary, and it was damaging at the time. And Keith looked at me and he said, wow, she might wish that she was dealing with my husband instead of dealing with me, because it was the first time that I really stood up to her. And he had corked off a few times before with her as well. But it was really the first time that I kind of unleashed and opened the file and verbally vomited all over.
I don't know. How does it feel? Even thinking back, you look like you sat up a little bit, you just looked empowered, and it's I'm an adult now. I don't know. Right. Because I think so many of us are still stuck in powerlessness because of our adoption. We had no choice in it. And then we didn't get to pick the people who took us and all that. It's okay, I'm an adult now. So what are you going to do?
Yeah. Yeah. It was about no longer being that kid who was afraid in the corner. And standing on my own 2 feet as an independent, autonomous adult and making choices for myself and for my own family, right or wrong, give me the space to do it and figure it out.
Yes.
Yes. I don't know if it was this preventive mode that, she was going to protect us from everything or try and prevent bad things from happening. Let me figure that out. And we've tried really hard to do that with our kids too. Respect each other enough to allow autonomy and space.
Thank you. Okay. before we do recommended resources, I just kind of want to give you a little space to give us advice or, kind of say what you'd like to say to other people who might be in a similar situation. And I don't know what that looks like. Do you want to talk about, you had mentioned to me, I don't know if it was in the recording or in a different conversation we had, like, it was a long time coming. Maybe this should have happened sooner, Is there something that you like, warning signs of things like, if I had set up these boundaries earlier, or if I had done this or that, hindsight, whatever. I don't know. Tell us what you want to. I'm not exactly sure what I'm trying to ask, but it's like I want to help other adoptees stand up for themselves, but I don't want to have things break down either. It's like this really confusing kind of space talking about estrangement.
Yeah, I wish I'd had the ability to create those boundaries sooner. Truth be told, it couldn't have happened any sooner. I can say that in reflection, I wish it had happened sooner. I can say that because of where I'm at today, but there's no way it could have happened any sooner because I was not confident enough in myself and my space and the ownership of who I am to be able to do it any sooner. I know it's a huge, huge balance. There's this whole societal messaging of being the good adoptee or the ungrateful adoptee, one I hate even more, or that the only adoptees who search are those who have had a bad experience with their adoptive parents. I don't think that's fair messaging, but it's the reality of the world we live in as adopted people. We're usually the last ones thought of. As I said, I don't miss them. I have no regrets other than I wish it could have happened sooner. I wish I could have come into myself sooner and had more time to live into this person I feel like I am now. I wish it could have happened sooner, but, midlife is what it is. And I had a friend tell me that 40 was a magical number, and I thought she was talking crazy talk. But now at 50, I can tell her, oh man, you were so spot on. There were so many things that happened in my 40s that really brought me to where I am now. And I just don't think I had the strength or the ability to do it any sooner. It's not easy space to walk, but for me, it's been so worth it.
I am so happy for you. Yeah.
Thank you.
I want to just interject just a little kind of thing before we do recommended resources. So Kirsten and I said the word boundaries like 30 times. And I could have asked her what she meant by that or like what her specific things, but I didn't on purpose because boundaries can be sort of any sort of line that is personal to you. And maybe it's, we don't want input on how we parent, or I don't want any input on my personal appearance or physical health or any of those kinds of things. I don't want any input or conversations on my search or reunion or lack thereof or etc. Right? Like it can be anything that it's not safe for you to engage with them about. So insert as needed as you as you
Yes.
look at your own relationship and think about boundaries, not just with your adoptive parents, but with anybody in your life. They're so personal to you, and what's safe for Kirsten might not be for me, and etc. So anyway, that's my little insertion. Do you have thoughts on that before we do recommendations?
Boundaries are important, and creating and establishing those boundaries, for me, it was empowering, and it helped me believe that I have value.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, that's so good. So good. Okay. we're going to do recommended resources. And I told Kirsten ahead of time that I was going to make fun of her because when we do this guest application process and all the things, I'm like, Kate, make sure you pick something new. And she didn't. So she's going to talk about something she loves and she wants to talk about it so much. We've talked about it before on the show, but now you're going to hear why Kirsten thinks that you should check this out. Okay, go ahead.
Well, shout out to my now friend, Anne Heffron, and surprise. Her book, You Don't Look Adopted. I had her book for quite a while and was honestly afraid to pick it up. I wasn't sure what I was going to find.
Really?
Yeah. I had it and it sat on my shelf because I just wasn't sure what was going to be in there. I was trying to do some of my own writing at the time, and I didn't want somebody else's voice to come through in what I was working on. And I just had to get to a space where I felt comfortable picking it up. It was one of the best windows into my own soul as well that I could have read. I would sit there and just shake my head and, oh man, me too. And just, I was in awe of finding words that I had struggled to find. They were right there on those pages. So very recommended. I know a lot of people do that, but for me, that book is self-love.
Oh, that's so good. That's so good. I love Anne. I talk about her a lot too. So that's okay. I'm so glad you did that. The other thing I'll plug is Anne and Pam Cordano, who's a therapist who's been on the show before as well. They are doing some weekly classes called Flourish, and they're live. Yeah. You might see Kirsten in there. I don't know. They're live. They're not recorded, so you have to be there. And they do some writing prompts. There's some discussion. I was able to attend one. I really enjoyed it. And if you follow Anne or Pam on Instagram or Facebook, you can find out sort of how to sign up for those. But I'm going to take us in a totally different direction because, wow, like last year was a whole thing. And we're not going to go down that rabbit trail, but I very much...
A whole thing.
Yes, it's a whole thing. I very much enjoyed on Off Script, which is the Adoptees On Patreon podcast. And Kirsten's been a supporter for a long time. Thank you. So many of you listening are. I really appreciate it. That's how the show continues. And my co-host on that, Carrie Cahill Mulligan, and I were reading all these adoptee-authored books last year. And I really tried to find more books from people that aren't like me so that I can learn, especially from people of color, because I really wanted to learn more about racial injustice and how I can be an ally. And I was very challenged, and it's good. It's really good for me to be challenged. So I want to just recommend to you an author that I loved reading. Oh my goodness, you have to follow her on Twitter. Her name is Shannon Gibney. Her Twitter handle is @GibneyShannon. And I read two of her books. The first one was See No Color, and it is about a transracial adoptee. And it's a YA novel. I really loved it. It's got baseball and race, and there's siblings, and it's not your typical adoptee reunion kind of a story. I really, really loved it. It's so good. And I also loved Shannon's novel that has nothing to do with adoption, Dream Country. And I don't know if you've read either of these, Kirsten, but when I read Dream Country, I learned so much about Liberia. I had no idea. I'm Canadian, so I don't really know a lot about the United States history of things. So I don't know. I know Canada, but so I learned so much. It's like this huge epic story of different families, different time periods, and she just like weaves everything together so beautifully. I loved it. So Shannon Gibney, she is a fellow adoptee and a wonderful author. And I really recommend you follow her. And gosh, this book, it's not about adoption, but it's great. Dream Country. check out that cover. It's so beautiful.
That is beautiful. We have a book problem in our house, so I'm going to add, well, some people would say it's a problem. We have books all the time, and they're coming in almost daily sometimes. So I will add those to my list for sure.
And if you, I'm describing the cover audio, that's great. But if you color code your bookshelf and you need more red books, got a red spine with some blue on it. So that's very, I don't know. That also felt like 2020 reference, like when you were bored in quarantine, you like color code your bookshelf. I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway, where can we connect with you online, Kirsten?
Well, I am on Facebook as Kirsten Weatherford. I'm also on Instagram as No More Misfit. That is from my blog page by the same name, No More Misfit. There is one blog entry entitled Misfit that kind of explains where the No More Misfit handle came from. So yeah, I would love to have people reach out, connect with me wherever they're comfortable.
I really enjoyed reading your blog. I especially like the one entry that's called Claimed.
Yeah.
And you wrote, and it was especially meaningful to me to read this before we talked about estrangement. There's a line in here: our adoptive families certainly made every attempt to claim us, make us 100% theirs. The problem with that is we adoptees know better. And you go on from there. But if you want to hear more about Kirsten's story, I definitely recommend you check out her blog. And it's nomoremisfit.com.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us. I had such a great time talking with you, even about such hard things. And thank you. Thanks for being willing to talk about the hard stuff, the real stuff.
Well, I really appreciate you giving adoptees the space to speak and have voice. It's been a lifesaver for me. So thank you. I appreciate you as well.
Wow, this is heavy stuff, you guys. It's just heavy stuff. So thanks for hanging in with me and listening to Kirsten's story. This is a first that I actually cried before we did the interview instead of during. And so I was pretty proud of Kirsten and I for kind of holding it together and just trying to talk facts. So just know if you're like, oh, Haley wasn't super, I mean, I was very emotional before and after, but managed to hold it together for you during. Anyway, I'm thankful that you're here. If you're experiencing estrangement or some other really challenging things, I hope that you are able to get connected into community, whatever that looks like, even if it's your in real life friends and not adoptee specific. It's really important for us to be talking about this and getting support about it. I maybe know from personal experience what stuffing all that stuff down does to you. So I'm really good at it. And that's not anything to brag about. Yeah, it's heavy. I want to thank Kirsten again. She's one of my Patreon supporters, as I mentioned, and without her and my other supporters, I wouldn't be able to keep podcasting. So I'm so excited that I get to make the show for you every week and that it's free and you can listen wherever, whenever, and feel like you're with other adoptees as you listen and feel supported in that way. But I can't do it without people like Kirsten that are willing to financially support the show. So if you want to join Kirsten and some other really, really incredible people, you can go to adopteeson.com/partner to find details of what you get when you support the show. There's a weekly podcast that's called Adoptees Off Script, and we're in the middle of doing a book club. We're starting book club this year. We just had a really fantastic chat with one of our book club authors, which was really fun. And so there'll be more of those throughout the year. If you want to join us again, adopteeson.com/partner for the details. Thanks so much for listening. Let's talk again next Friday.